Although this phenomenon is not new, it is a common thing and has been a common thing throughout history for humans to be interacting with some form of spirit, some form of non-physical, non-tangible intelligence that is getting involved with humans and actually causing unseen but very profound effects upon the world. Now, there's sort of a fine line that exists when it comes to dealing with non-physical entities. And within the sort of false light, new agey spirituality that is very popular, we have essentially this egoic structure of people who channel. They talk to spirits and then they give these messages, and then because these messages came from spirits, it must be true. It must be the truth. The spirit told me so. Right? Now, this is something we need to deeply consider, and we need to understand exactly what it is that we're dealing with, right? So, I mentioned in my last video, which you can go watch it if you like, but I'm going to give you a quick rundown of this phenomenon where if humans don't understand something, if they can't categorize it in a way, they tend to deify it. In other words, make it something that is above them, that is beyond them. So if you get someone who is this sort of new age, false light, spiritual mentality sort of person, and all of a sudden they start channeling, they start getting information from the beyond, which is a lot more common than you might think, without having the proper foundation and the proper knowledge of self, this person can be easily taken advantage of. And this is actually a lot of what we see within these false light spiritual communities, is that you have people that are very confused and they're channeling, and they have no idea what might be speaking through them, what that thing's agenda might be, right? Because spirits, and this is something that I want to really ground this idea of like how to think about spirits. Imagine you walked into a busy city. Like you went down to the city that's nearby you, if you live by a city, just some city with a dense population. And all of a sudden, you get that what appears to be like crazy homeless person coming up and telling you about this and this and all this prophetic stuff like just coming out of their mouth, right? I don't know if any of you have had that happen to you, but you get these people that it's like they're just spouting and there's this information coming through them. Those individuals are often have spirits that are tapped into them, and they're speaking through them because they have a very shoddy foundation. But I want to give you this sort of as above, so below perspective of this. Talking to just any spirit in the spirit realm would be like going into the city and the next person that comes up to you and starts telling you about stuff, you immediately assume like they're a guru, right? You wouldn't think this way necessarily unless you're like quite naive. You wouldn't think this person who comes up to you and is spraying you with all this nonsense, typically, you wouldn't immediately say, oh, well, they're saying it's a prophecy and they're saying it's this and they're saying it's that. So therefore, it's definitely true what they're saying. Like there's nothing else going on here. This is definitely balanced. But because it's a spirit, in other words, because psychologically people assume this thing is a level above us, people automatically assume that it's like, oh, well, it must be true then. What that spirit's telling me, it must be true. This is what we have to consider, my friends. This is how we have to approach these realms like an adept, not like the neophyte who's just like, a spirit's talking to me. I'm so special. A spirit's talking to me. I have to convey this message. I am the chosen one, right? That's this ego mentality that essentially gets this person all worked up. And then all of a sudden, this spirit, whatever that spirit might be, has total control over them. They can tell them whatever they want and they can get them to go and do this, whether or not that's actually in their best interest. Because remember, the spirits are out for their own gain. They're out for their own best interest. This would be like a great relative of yours, say, like you had your great aunt Petunia, and then she passed on, and now she's still working around the Earth space for whatever reason, and she comes and tells you this and that. Now, if that woman wasn't like spiritually attuned, if they weren't advanced within their life, why do you think becoming a spirit would make any difference? Sure, they have a different perspective, but it would be like I'm standing on the roof of the house and now I can see further around. You have a different perspective, no doubt, but if you're standing on the, just because they're standing on the roof of the house doesn't mean they're saying like, oh, you shouldn't go that way. Why shouldn't I go that way? Or you should go that way. Why should I go that way? Because they might want to just see how they can control you. They might want to just see how much they can influence you and be entertained by that. I've talked also about the more serious entities that end up being like gods and like powerful egregores that actually feed off of humans and feed off of their energy. So when humans give their attention and their energy to these spirits, these entities, then they actually become more powerful on the astral plane. So it is in their best interest to keep you thinking that you need them, essentially, because then you're forever going to be projecting them in that position of like they are powerful, they are more than me, they are holy, whatever it might be. And that energy that you're projecting onto them is actually creating that space for them. So we have to, like I said, we have to be adept about this. We have to recognize, I'm not saying that all spirits are bad. I'm not saying that all spirits are ignorant, that all spirits are a sense of ignorance, or that you can't actually gain any sort of wisdom from the spiritual realm. What I'm saying is if you're going to engage with that sort of thing at all, it needs to be from a place of wholeness. It needs to be from a place of, I am already full and whole within myself, and I recognize that the self is within me. It is not something that I need to seek in external entities. It is this thing, and this is the major trap you see in these false light circles, is that people will be like, and then God said, and then this, and then this. And a lot of times that thing might defy like common sense. It might defy that it's like, well, now I can do this because it's justified because God told me to do that, or an angel told me to do that, right? We give these things these titles. We say, it spoke to me so clear, and it was this, and it was this. And when we give it that sort of title, if the person in their mind has a certain association with a being of that title, like, oh, it was God or it was an angel, they're immediately going to say, this thing is more than me. It's more self than I am self, which is the trap, my friends. That is the trap. Because if you fall into some sort of illusion of thinking that something outside of you or some spirit that's talking to you is more self than you are self, which is inherently false because all is self. In other words, if you put them on a pedestal and do not see that you are in fact equals, you are likely to get taken advantage of. And there are people out here today that are saying, I'm channeling this and I'm channeling this and I'm bringing this. I'm not even saying that like the information that might be coming forth from these type of people is necessarily off. But if you yourself have a strong foundation of knowing the self within you, knowing the supreme being, often you'll listen to these channelers and you can feel something quite strange going on. Quite weird, like you might not disagree with the information, but the frequency that's being generated from it is something that's sort of off-putting. And that's something that, I mean, let me know in the comments if any of you have experienced that sort of thing before, because I've learned over the years that it's more common than I originally thought. But it's within these realms of people deifying spirits, putting them on this pedestal, and then letting them take over them and channeling something despite them not having any idea what this being might be, calling it something like a god without knowing what God is, calling it something like an angel, an angle, without knowing what an angel is, and then letting it speak through you and letting it control you, letting it tell you what to do, letting it tell you how to live your life, despite the fact that these beings are not in a human body. They're not in a human form. Like I said, this is where things start to get kind of crazy, because these spirits might be telling you to do things that might make sense to spirits, but it does not make sense to the human being, to the spirit being in a human. Now, that's a point I want to bring up too. We are spirits, right? What we are is spirits. If this doesn't fully demystify this idea, I don't know what will. We are spirits that are inhabiting human vessels right now. So if you were to think about that and then think about the spirits that are not inhabiting human vessels, what does that clear up the picture for you? Can you see that you are the same as those spirits, just in a human experience, meaning that you have a vantage point they do not have? You have a nervous system. You have your sense of touch, smell, hearing, all of that. You have these human faculties, the human feelings. You're plugged into this experience, whereas spirits that are choosing to get involved with the human experience are looking into it. They're not in it. But a lot of them, especially the ones that tend to have like regrets about life, or the ones that just are so attached to this earthly experience that they can't move on from this space, they want to have skin in the game. Now, I've talked about this in my video about addictions. Spirits want to have skin in the game because they want to, when you have skin in the game, you have something at stake. When you have something at stake, you have essentially, quite literally, weight. In other words, you get to feel the weight of it. You get to feel the experience. You get to have the sensations, the visceral sensations of, I'm getting to experience this. I'm watching this. I'm consuming this. I'm interacting with this. Spirits who cannot detach from this space, they want to be in a body because they didn't get to do what they needed to do within a body, and they didn't get to the point where they have known themselves on a deep level to where they can move on. They're still attached. They're still anchored. And so they often try to influence humans by saying, I'm God, or I'm an angel, or I'm a Holy Spirit, and now I'm going to come and talk to you, and I'm going to try to get you to do all these things. Because if I can get you to do all of these things, then maybe I can feel that for myself. They crave it. It's like a drug for them, right? They need to have that little bit of taste of it. They want to taste life. They want to get a taste of it, but they can only do that through you. And they can only do that through you if you let them, right? Now, this is a huge problem in the world, quite honestly. You know, like I said, I do want to reiterate, not all spirits are going to mess you up. In other words, they're not all trying to just do whatever they want to do and they're messing with humans, right? There are some spirits that are generally far less invasive that you can ascertain certain bits of wisdom, knowledge, information from. And you, as the self, get to determine if you're going to listen to that or not. But my friends, never fall into the trap of thinking, my guides said, my God said, angels said, they told me this, so I have to. You get to choose. You are the supreme being. You are the one that is here having the experience, and anything that comes through your head, because often these spirits speak to us through our thoughts. That's the kind of wavelength they're on, right? You cannot see your thoughts, yet very few people would tell you that it's not something that is almost like tangibly, it's almost like a tangible sense of awareness. You know what I'm saying? No one would disagree that like thoughts are there. The same way that I could say like my hand is here and I can clap my hands together. You could say I thought this, I was thinking this, I had this idea. Your thoughts are very present, but they're not on a wavelength that's physical. I couldn't grab my thought and pull it out of my head unless I was some like master chi guy or something like that, right? Imagine that, you just take your thoughts like cast it away. I'm sure there's some level like that, but this is all a matter of bandwidth. It's all a matter of frequency, and these spirits live closer to that frequency where they're still connected to the thought space. They're still connected to that metaphysical, energetic, fourth dimensional realm, if you will, and they can speak through that. So this is where people channel. They get something that'll plug into their space and then they receive that information. But you decide whether or not you should be listening to whatever that spirit is. You decide whether it makes you more holy because a spirit's talking to you, right? That is the trap, my friends, and that is the awareness that we need to cultivate when we're dealing with a space that is very much more occult than it is physical in a lot of ways. And what I mean by that is there's more spiritual, unseen stuff happening than oftentimes there is physical, tangible, obvious stuff happening. And oftentimes, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, it is these occult, unseen things that are happening all the time that are causing certain effects and certain things to happen throughout reality that we simply need to be aware of. We need to be aware of ourselves. We need to be aware of what might be happening around us in order to keep our vessel intact. We need to stay whole. We need to remember that it is all within us and we are this torus field. And when we know that it's within us, we essentially bring the polarities into proper contact within ourselves. We become a very powerful force. We become a magnetic field that generates what it is that we choose, what we choose to focus on, what we choose to bring into our field. And when we're fortified like that, it becomes far more difficult for spirits, especially like the more nefarious Joker type spirits, to actually get into our space. They cannot resonate with it. They can't vibrate with it, and they simply get repelled, like magnetism. So with that, my friends, know that it is within you. Know that you don't need to have something talking to you, something telling you what is, in order for you to connect to some sense of supreme self. It's already within you. When you realize that, you'll recognize just how fickle some of these higher beings can actually be, because it's just a game to them. We are spirits just like they are. So never put something on a pedestal above yourself, because you are the supreme self. There is nothing higher than you. There is nothing beyond you, your true self. And I'm not talking about the limited human version of you, right? Of course, we're all special, we're all unique in our own ways, but I'm talking about the supreme self that exists within you and is the greatest creation, the greatest manifestation of you. That is already existent, is already within you, and you don't need anything outside of you in order to reach it, because it's what you already have. It's what you already are. All right, my friends. So that's all for today. With that, be well, be whole, and we'll talk soon. Take care.